They told him to get out, just like that. The old man in the red jacket standing quietly near the vintage aircraft display, and the security guard pointed at the door. Leave, now. You don't belong here. The veteran didn't argue. He never did. He just looked at the young guard with those sad, serious eyes, nodded slowly, and turned toward the exit. But then, through the hangar's massive doors, 4 black SUVs pulled up in formation, military precision, and everything changed. His name was Robert Chen, 70 years old, white hair, white beard, always wearing that same faded red jacket over a plain t-shirt. Most days he looked like any other forgotten old man shuffling through life, the kind people glance past without a second thought. He lived alone in a small apartment near the old airfield, spent his mornings at the diner down the street, his afternoons walking. Sometimes he'd find his way to the aviation museum, stand in front of the old jets and helicopters, just stand there with his hands in his pockets, staring. The younger staff always wondered what he was looking at so intently. They never asked. To them, he was just another elderly visitor who stayed too long. That Thursday afternoon started like any other. Robert walked through the museum entrance, nodded to the woman at the ticket counter who barely looked up from her phone, and made his way to the military aviation section, the hangar section. It was a massive space, cathedral-like, filled with restored aircraft from different eras. F-4 Phantoms, Hueys, a Chinook helicopter suspended from the ceiling. Robert stopped in front of a particular helicopter, a dusty Cobra gunship, and stood there. Just stood. His expression never changed, that same sad, serious look he always wore. But his eyes, if anyone had bothered to look closely, held something deeper. Memory, loss, recognition. The new security guard, Marcus, was 23 and took his job seriously, maybe too seriously. He'd been hired 2 weeks ago and was eager to prove himself. When he saw the old man in the red jacket standing motionless in front of the Cobra for nearly an hour, he made assumptions. Homeless, probably. Confused, maybe senile. Marcus had been told to watch for people who looked out of place. And this old man, with his worn jacket and weathered face, definitely looked out of place among the families and school groups. Marcus approached. "Excuse me, sir. The museum's closing soon." Robert didn't respond immediately. He kept staring at the helicopter. Marcus stepped closer, louder. "Sir, I said we're closing. You need to move along." Robert turned slowly, met the young man's eyes. "I'm just looking," he said quietly. His voice was soft, gravelly. Marcus crossed his arms. "Well, you've been looking for over an hour. Other people want to see the exhibits too. You're blocking the walkway." Robert glanced around. There was no one else in this section. The walkway was empty. "I'll move," he said simply, and took one step to the side. But Marcus wasn't satisfied. Something about the old man irritated him. The way he stood there so quietly, so stubbornly present. The way he didn't apologize or hurry. "Look, sir, maybe you should just head out for today." Robert's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I paid admission," he said. "Same as everyone." Marcus felt his authority being questioned. He stepped closer, using his height advantage. "Yeah, well, I'm asking you to leave. Now. We've had complaints about people loitering." Robert's hands, weathered and scarred, clenched slightly at his sides. But he said nothing. He just looked at Marcus with those sad, serious eyes that had seen things the young guard couldn't imagine. The confrontation was attracting attention now. A few visitors stopped, watching. Another security guard, older, approached. "Everything okay here, Marcus?" Marcus nodded. "Just escorting this gentleman out. He's been here too long." The older guard, Tom, looked at Robert, recognition flickering. "Wait, isn't this the guy who comes in every week?" Marcus shrugged. "Don't know, don't care. Rules are rules." Tom hesitated. "Maybe we should just let him finish looking." Marcus shook his head. "No, I'm handling this." He turned back to Robert. "Sir, I'm not going to ask again. Leave, or I'll call the police." Robert took a deep breath, the kind of breath that carries decades of patience, of swallowing pride, of choosing silence over confrontation. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll go." He turned toward the exit, his shoulders slightly hunched, his gait slow. Marcus watched him go with satisfaction. Tom watched with discomfort, something nagging at him. As Robert reached the hangar doors, the sunlight streaming in, Tom suddenly remembered something. "Wait," he called out. "What's your name, sir?" Robert paused, turned slightly. "Chen," he said. "Robert Chen." Tom's face went pale. "Oh my God." Marcus looked confused. "What?" Tom grabbed his radio. "Get Director Williams down here. Now." But before anyone could respond, the sound of engines filled the air. Heavy vehicles. Through the open hangar doors, 4 black SUVs pulled up in perfect formation. Government plates. The kind of vehicles that mean something important is happening. The doors opened simultaneously, and men in suits emerged. Not just any suits. These men moved with military bearing, with purpose. Behind them, from the lead vehicle, stepped a woman in a navy dress uniform, captain's insignia gleaming. She was perhaps 50, her expression serious and focused. She scanned the hangar, and her eyes locked onto Robert, who had frozen near the exit. "Captain Chen!" she called out, her voice carrying across the space. The entire hangar seemed to stop. Visitors froze. Staff turned. Marcus stood with his mouth open. The woman in uniform walked directly toward Robert, and as she approached, she came to attention and saluted. Sharp, crisp, respectful. "Sir, we've been looking for you. The ceremony is about to start." Robert, the old man in the red jacket who'd just been escorted out like a vagrant, slowly returned the salute. His posture changed. Decades of training reasserted themselves. His back straightened. His shoulders squared. The sad expression remained, but something else entered his eyes. Recognition. Duty. Director Williams came running into the hangar, tablet in hand, face flushed. "What's going on?" The Navy captain turned to him. "I'm Captain Sarah Morrison. We're here for Captain Robert Chen. There's a dedication ceremony at the Naval Air Station in 1 hour. Captain Chen is the guest of honor." Williams looked at Robert, then at Marcus, then back at Robert. "I'm sorry, Captain Chen? Our Captain Chen?" The woman nodded. "Retired Captain Robert Chen, Navy Cross recipient, Distinguished Flying Cross, Purple Heart, 3 tours in Vietnam." The director's face drained of color. "Oh God, I had no idea. Why didn't you tell us? Why isn't this in our records?" Robert shrugged slightly. That same quiet gesture. "I'm just a visitor," he said softly. "I like to look at the aircraft." Captain Morrison stepped closer to Robert. "Sir, they're dedicating the new training facility in your name. The ceremony starts in an hour. We've been trying to reach you all week. Your phone was disconnected." Robert looked down. "Couldn't pay the bill last month." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. This decorated war hero, this man who'd served his country with distinction, couldn't afford his phone bill. And they'd just thrown him out of a museum dedicated to the very history he'd helped write. Marcus felt like the floor was dropping away beneath him. He'd just ordered a Navy Cross recipient, a man who'd flown combat missions, who'd saved lives, to get out. Treated him like he was nothing. "Sir, he started, but the words died in his throat. Robert turned to look at him, and there was no anger in his eyes. Just that same sad, serious expression. "It's all right, son," Robert said quietly. "You were doing your job." But Captain Morrison wasn't as forgiving. She looked at Marcus, at the director. "This is how you treat veterans? This is how you honor the men and women who served?" Tom, the older security guard, stepped forward. "Director," I tried to tell Marcus. "Mr. Chen, Captain Chen, comes here every week. Always to this section. Always stands in front of that Cobra." Williams looked at the helicopter, then at Robert. "Why this one, Captain?" Robert was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked slowly back to the aircraft, stood in front of it. "This bird," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "November 1971. I flew her. My gunner was a kid from Ohio, 20 years old. Name was Danny Martinez. We took heavy fire during an extraction. Danny took a round through the canopy. He died before we could get back to base. I held his hand the whole way. He was quiet for another moment. I come here to remember him, to remember all of them." The silence in the hangar was absolute. Visitors stood frozen, some with tears in their eyes. Marcus felt sick. He'd interrupted a veteran's private memorial, his moment of remembrance for a fallen brother. Captain Morrison's expression softened. "Sir," she said gently, "Danny's sister will be at the ceremony today. She asks specifically to meet you, to thank you for bringing her brother home." Robert's composure cracked slightly. His eyes glistened. "Maria? Little Maria? She's there?" Morrison nodded. Not so little anymore. She's a colonel now. Army. Following in her brother's footsteps. She never forgot that you were the one who made sure Danny came home, that his family could say goodbye. Director Williams stepped forward, his voice shaking. Captain Chen, I am so deeply sorry. This should never have happened. We're going to make this right. Starting today, you have a lifetime platinum membership, full access, anytime. And we're going to create a proper display about your service, about your crew, about Danny Martinez, if you'll let us. Robert looked at him, then at Marcus, then at the Cobra. That would be good, he said quietly. Danny deserves to be remembered. They all do. Morrison checked her watch. Sir, we need to go. The ceremony. Robert nodded. He started toward the SUVs, then paused, turned back to Marcus. Young man, Robert said, his voice carrying that quiet authority that comes from leading men in combat. Let me tell you something. Everyone who walks through those doors has a story. The old woman looking at the WAC uniforms might have been a nurse in Korea. The quiet guy in the corner studying the tank display might have served in Desert Storm. You never know who you're talking to. Treat everyone with respect. Not because of what they've done, but because it's right. Marcus nodded, unable to speak, tears running down his face. Yes, sir, he finally managed. I'm sorry, sir. Robert's expression didn't change, but he nodded once. Learn from it. That's all any of us can do. As Robert walked toward the waiting SUVs, other visitors began to applaud, slowly at first, then building. People who'd been watching, who'd witnessed the whole thing, clapping for this old man in the red jacket who'd been treated like nothing, and responded with grace. Robert didn't acknowledge the applause. He just walked, that same slow, measured pace, climbed into the lead SUV, and the convoy pulled away. Tom stood next to Marcus, who was still crying. You okay, kid? Marcus shook his head. How did I not see it? How did I not know? Tom put a hand on his shoulder. Because he didn't want you to. Men like that. They don't walk around expecting recognition. They just live their lives quietly, carrying their memories, honoring their dead. That's who they are. Director Williams was already on his phone, making calls, setting things in motion. Within an hour, the museum's social media posted an apology and an announcement about the forthcoming exhibit, honoring Captain Chen and his crew. Within a day, local news picked up the story. Within a week, the museum had established a new protocol, training all staff about recognizing and honoring veterans, about treating every visitor with dignity regardless of appearance. They brought in veteran liaisons, created a special memorial section, reached out to other quiet visitors who might have stories to tell. The dedication ceremony at the Naval Air Station was everything it should have been. Hundreds of people attended. Active duty personnel, veterans, families of those who'd served with Robert. Maria Martinez, now Colonel Martinez, embraced him and thanked him through tears for bringing her brother home, for making sure he didn't die alone in the sky. The new training facility bore a plaque with Robert's name and his crew's names, including Danny Martinez. Robert stood through it all with that same sad, serious expression, accepting the honor not for himself, but for those who hadn't come home. Marcus quit his security job the next day, not because he was fired, he wasn't, but because he couldn't stand there knowing what he'd done. He enrolled in community college, started studying history, started volunteering at veteran organizations. He wrote Robert a letter, apologizing again, explaining what he'd learned. Robert wrote back, short, simple, keep learning, keep growing, honor them by being better. Marcus kept that letter. Read it whenever he doubted himself. Years later, he became a teacher, made sure his students understood the cost of service, the importance of respect, the danger of judging by appearances. Robert continued his weekly visits to the museum, but now staff greeted him by name. Visitors who recognized him from the news asked to shake his hand, to hear his stories. He was always polite, always humble, but he still spent most of his time in front of that Cobra, standing quietly, remembering. The museum created a small bench near the helicopter with a plaque, in memory of Warrant Officer Danny Martinez and all who served. Robert sat there sometimes, when his legs got tired, but mostly he stood. It was his way of standing guard, of keeping watch, of making sure they weren't forgotten. The story spread beyond the local community. Other museums reached out, asking about their protocols, their veteran outreach. Organizations dedicated to homeless veterans used it as an example of how easily we overlook those who served. How a man who'd earned the Navy Cross could be treated like he was worthless because of a worn jacket and an unpaid phone bill. Changes happened, small ones but real. More awareness, more training, more respect. Not perfect, never perfect, but better. And it started because one old man refused to be bitter, chose to teach rather than condemn, turned a moment of disrespect into a lesson in dignity. Robert Chen still wears that red jacket, still has that sad, serious expression, still walks slowly through the world like any other elderly man. But those who know, who've learned, they see something different now. They see the weight he carries, the memories he honors, the quiet strength it takes to live with loss and still choose grace. They see a hero who never needed the title, who served because it was right, who comes back week after week to stand guard over the memory of a 20-year-old kid from Ohio who never got the chance to grow old. And in seeing him, really seeing him, they learn what respect truly means. Not just for veterans, but for everyone. Because everyone has a story, everyone carries something, and everyone deserves to be seen.